Okay, so it's a bit of a nebulous topic. I'm actually going to kind of talk about four things. So I want to kind of show of hands. I can sort of increase or decrease. I'm not going to get through all of it. So how many people kind of are most interested in, say, like I'm going to talk about our rancher stack and how we scale it and how we do multi-site? How one's most interested in that? Who's most interested in sort of practical examples of sort of theming, how we do that in perhaps a different way than you used to? Couple, few as well. And if I get time, I want to kind of do Prediform, which is our product which we built on top of Plone, which is a low-code platform for doing workflow. There's been a few different talks about very similar things. So anyone really interested in that? Okay. If I run out of time, maybe there's an extra lightning talk. Okay, so reducing the learning curve. I'm really going to talk about kind of one way of doing it. And this is coming from the perspective of an integrator where you're hiring people to code, or an organization, or even if you're like, a power webmaster kind of person and you want to get something up quickly. So talked about this a bit. People know that, like, build out Python, learning the whole Plone stack, things like ZCA and stuff. It's quite a bit of time to get up and going. Things like, I think, the headless kind of concept where you just have the REST API is going to reduce that learning curve. If that's all you got to know is the REST API and understand that, but you still have to be an Angular, like a React person probably, I guess. So if you're hiring someone who's an Angular person, a React person, then you probably can get going pretty quickly. Otherwise, you're still going to need to pay a reasonable amount for an expensive developer. Whereas, like some of the techniques I'm going to talk about is, you can train someone up, in a couple of days if they know HTML, CSS, and some JavaScript maybe, to do some reasonably complicated things. And there's also the option for non-programmers. So some of the stuff we've been doing with Prediform and Plone is to make it so you don't have to write any code at all. It's got kind of a visual code builder and so on. So it's a low-code platform that you could do reasonably complicated workflows without writing any code. So there's the sort of complexity maybe, and then the thing is, yeah, like I said, the time may be quite short with React, but you're still going to end up paying a bit for those developers, right? So as an example, this particular one, right? So this is a theme that we got an agency to do. So we were delivered HTML, CSS, JavaScript, etc. Right? We don't go and build things on top of Plone themes. We take a theme, we get someone else to do it. They do all the hard work with all the HTML and everything, and then we make it work basically. So we hired a developer who basically did this job more or less like without too much input, using some of these techniques, and it's in his first month of employment, right? So there's the other thing we kind of do is lifts and shifts, where we this is a theme that was a complete site that was built on top of another CMS, and we just rip out all the HTML and JavaScript and everything and stick it using Diazo and make it all work. So I'm going to talk some examples about how we do these sort of things quickly. And the other thing we do is sometimes you can buy themes with Plone. How many people knew you could buy themes with Plone? What you do is you go to Theme Forest and you buy a WordPress theme and you use Diazo and you make it work. So this is our website. That's what we did. The same techniques work, and you can get nice themes that way, right? So what we don't do is we don't override things. We don't use variables in CSS. We don't use Barcelona underneath. We use it for the backend. We use the backend front-end thing where we keep our public stuff themed and we keep the editing interface using Barcelona. So the serverless kind of thing, right? So one of the reasons, part of what we're doing with all this is we run multi-site. So no, I'm getting ahead of myself. So serverless, how many people have heard of like AWS Lambda and stuff? Serverless, the whole serverless concept. So this is kind of a new paradigm. What it means is that you're only writing a little bit of code, right? You're not deploying an application server. You're writing just the code you want, right? And it's really simple deployment, right? You just upload it very simply. The biggest thing is that you don't know where it runs, right? It just sits there in the cloud and runs. It's like an endpoint that's there, possibly stateless. You can hook it up to a database, but the middleware bit, the application bit, is just sitting there running. You don't know what server it's running on. It's just running in the cloud. So you don't have to install a DB, maybe connect via APIs to some other DB. And you only pay for when it runs, right? It's kind of a per second billing type thing. So you can pay more than if you were running the thing constantly, but you don't have to run the thing constantly, right? So the thing is that through the web, what we have with Plone is when you put the code in the database, you have a very, very similar thing, right? So you only write just the code you want if you're using theme fragments and Plone and things like that. You're not, if you take out Plone and treat Plone as your deployment mechanism, then you're just writing the code that you want to actually achieve what you need. You can upload a theme zip or, ambidextrous, you can just upload a zip. Again, the code, you don't know where it's running, right? When you're running a multi-server, multi-ZEO cluster, you can have as many servers as you want, and that code's running over all of them, but you've only just deployed it in one place, and it's automatically distributed. So there's still the problem of, that's why we call it DIY serverless, because someone's got to install it for you. But with things like Docker and Kubernetes and RDS and stuff, if you've got a standard Plone setup like a Docker image, you can actually do this without too much trouble or get someone else to do it for you. And I'm going to show how we do it. Per second billing, well, it'd be kind of cool to implement that. I mean, all you really need to do is just kind of look at, add up all the number of seconds that everyone actually used for domains that they that are running through your system, and you can get per second. You can work out how much time they've spent in total. So how we do the multi-site stuff. So we use mount points. We have a different database for every single customer. Obviously, we don't want to restart Plone or do any deployments to put a new site up. So what we do is we pre-allocate a whole bunch of databases, SOAP databases, from mostly it's 0 to 20, but yeah, that's how we do it. So we use collective.file storage for that. We don't want to do the VHM stuff in Nginx. Again, we don't want to restart or anything. So we do it in virtual hosting, right? So this is a neat little trick. Virtual Host Monster doesn't support SSL. There's no way to sort of like say that I want to support an SSL domain. So you can use this neat little trick. So this is what goes in your virtual host monster. So we've done this underscore SSL thing. This redirector thing is actually, that's a plugin we have. So basically we're taking the non-SSL domain, sending it to a ZOAP object, which is a redirector, which has rules that says send it to the SSL domain or wherever we want to send it. So it allows us to do arbitrary redirects for any domain within ZOAP. And then on the hard proxy side, all you're doing is just adding that underscore SSL. So that allows us to basically use the VHM to do all our routing of domains to the right place. We use Let's Encrypt. We haven't quite hooked up the Let's Encrypt side of things to automatically do it, but we could. So we support multiple Plone versions in our cluster, right? So we're running Plone 4, Plone 5. We may be running 5.0, we may be running 5.2, I guess, maybe soon. And we run all of that in the same cluster. So at that point, right, you need to work out how to get this site to go to Plone 4 and this site to go to Plone 5. And that's a little more tricky. So we wrote a thing called collective ZOAP console. What that does is take the VHM and other things that you want out of ZOAP and sends it to console every time it changes within ZOAP. Then we use a console template, and that will rewrite our hard proxy template and go and all it's actually doing is it's very simple, right? Like we could get it to rewrite more and do rewrite rules and all sorts of stuff, but all we're doing is basically saying this is Plone 4, this is Plone 5, then it goes to different queues. Unfortunately, that does restart hard proxy, which is kind of sucks a bit. Sucks that hard proxy doesn't have live reloading. It'd be nice to fix that. Well, the way we want to fix that, I think, is do the classification in the step before in Varnish, and that does have live reloading, and just use a header. So we just haven't done that yet. So then scaling. So we run Varnish, obviously, to help with scaling. We run one big Varnish in front of all of it, and it does our logging. So the Rancher, one thing nice about Rancher we're using is that when we add it, and we can just scale the Plone instances and it'll create new servers, and it actually doesn't have to restart hard proxy, right? We can use our custom hard proxy code, and it uses an API to go and add and remove servers from the appropriate queues, which is really nice. So yeah, like scaling instances is super easy. We do some stuff to kind of help manage traffic. We do classic traffic classification a bit. I think in our latest version we're doing a bit less of this, but so we treat crawlers a little bit differently because they tend to make the cache extra big, which kind of sucks. So we have a special instance, 1 or 2 instances there, just for crawlers, so that we don't have things going through and ruining our normal ZOP caches. Things like long requests, for things where we try and minimize the long requests, we try and use Plone.app.async and so on. But where we do have them, and we know they're there, we can sort of have separate. This is all using hard proxy queues, by the way. You can have the same instances and different groups of instances, all using hard proxy queues with different sort of settings, so that you can say, and it basically separates your traffic out. So not everything's going to all instances. The big thing you're trying to avoid here is you really don't want big, long requests blocking small requests, basically, and making some things unavailable. We've done this in the past where we've set posts aside to like 1 or 2 instances, and that helps reduce write conflicts because you just got less instances. Like if you've got particular applications that happen to be doing a lot of writing at a particular time because of government deadlines and stuff, then yeah, that became, and all of this kind of has failover, so we can just not run certain types of these Plone instances, these Plone Docker instances, and it all kind of still works. The latest version doesn't quite have this, but the old version did. But collective send file, it helps offload a whole bunch of things like videos and stuff like that. We did a work to make collective send file work with wildcard media and so on, so that you can have really big videos and it's all just getting streamed out of Nginx, not out of Plone. We use ZRS. So the thing is, the whole sort of idea here with all the theme stuff is that we don't actually have to deploy new Docker images. We basically have a whole bunch of plugins that are very generic that get used across all our sites. We do make those plugins. We do have to fix them sometimes, but we don't necessarily have to do them very often. So we're using collective. We made a. It's a tool we used to deploy things before, but now we use it to sort of bundle everything up to make it easier to develop packages and put them into Docker. And then when, like most of the deployment we're doing is these theme zips or a Plomino zip or a few things. So I'll talk a bit more about that. That is pretty much all the plugins we're using. More or less, Plone 4 has a few more that we haven't needed for the current set of sites. This is mainly from Plone 5, I think. The first set, mostly the ones I'm going to talk about, which are things that help us build client things. The second set are more like things that sort of give us functionality that we don't have to use for customization. And then the last set are more sort of infrastructure sort of things, I guess. Drop-down menu. It had to fit in 3 columns, so it's not perfect. Okay, so I want to talk about fat themes, which is something that David Bain, I don't know if did he make up the term, or I think he made up the term. It describes, I think this thing is that when we talk about theming, right, what I notice is when people are talking about it, they talk about different things at this conference, right? Like people are talking about, just light changing of CSS variables and just doing everything via CSS, right? To me, that's not theming. A fat theme, like one reason I think WordPress really works is because when you use WordPress, you're using a theme, and the theme has a lot more in it than just changing a few colors here and there, right? What it's doing is giving you shortcodes and content types and example content, and everything in the theme is often like, is designed for your use case, right? You'll buy an e-commerce one, or you'll buy a library one, or something like that. So the whole experience is much, much nicer, right? And this is not the way we've kind of thought about things at Plone, right? So what kind of happens is that, I mean, really, if you're building a CMS, right, only one thing can win, right? Either the designer with the theme, they're the ones in control of the sort of the whole experience, or your plugins are kind of going to have control, or your editors, have sort of layout and they can do everything. Plone, we've kind of tried to have it all, and the problem with that is that if you do the plugins first, right, then your themes become really hard because you've got to take into account all these different places and things that the plugins can do, right? If someone goes and installs a new plugin, then it installs JavaScript, some JavaScript thing, then it's probably not going to work, with the other theme. So it makes making theming really hard. Editors first also makes theming hard, right? Although it would be, we've got to balance this. We've got to make sure that editors can have the amount of control that they need for smaller sites, while still maintaining the right amount of control as an integrator or themer. Okay, so I think if you didn't see John's talk, go and watch the video. It's another CMS, and it does a lot of this kind of through the web stuff like really well, and has a whole export format that brings way more and is more sort of integrated than the way Plone does it. So it's an alternative way to look at it. So the reason why I've sort of talked about in this past, Diazo is great. It's this kind of, one of the reasons I like it is that it's a scalpel. You can just go and override the little bit you want. I hate this idea that you take this large chunk of internal Plone code and you just want to change one little bit, right? And so that's what JBot is. It's a massive hammer. And that incurs technical debt, basically. You're now responsible for working out, like if Plone goes and changes some internal API, then you've dragged all of that into your application and you're responsible for that now. So you still get that with Diazo. People can change IDs and stuff, but it's like, there's less debt there. Diazo is this great get out of jail free card, right? If you've got the HTML there, you want to change something, you can fiddle with it. If someone does a plugin that's almost right, but you just need it to fit a bit better, then you can move things around and do what you want. I don't like writing XML as much as the next person, but the concept is still a good concept. So here's a bunch of examples. So here's one that we did, right? Font awesome icons. So a lot of what we do is text styles. We use tile styles, we use character styles, we use various different things to link up Diazo rules. And here what we're doing is we've got this quick links box on the left, and rather than just make this one particular box, which is hard-coded, it's like, well, why don't we allow Font Awesome anywhere in the site? So we now have a character style that turns, you just tell the people to go and have a look at Font Awesome site, pick the icon name, they select it, they pick turn Font Awesome name into icon, and it does the rest. And that's a little bit of Diazo, right? It's pretty straightforward. This is just a concept that you can use for almost anything you want to do, right? So this is kind of like a cheap person's version of shortcodes. It would be nice if we had better ways to do this. So carousels is another interesting one. We've done it a bunch of different ways in the past. So I'm going to talk about that. So there's things like collective carousel. We kind of got burnt by using some of the plugins. They often come with their own JavaScript. We're taking designs from designers and stuff. They've already got their own JavaScript and everything. We don't want to have this, worry about having this JavaScript. They often have schemas, like this particular one's kind of interesting. yeah, you can't see here, but like they wanted to be able to mix images and HTML on the right-hand side. So we've got to have a slightly more interesting schema, right? Doesn't fit for most of the plugins. Way a lot of people do it is they use a folder with a bunch of images. Again, it's like, well, you can only have an image, a title, description. Where do you put the link? I don't know. Yeah, where does the link? You run out of stuff, right? You're basically reusing content. And I hate the idea that you've got content in the site that is not content, right? It's basically part of one page, but it's sitting around, right? And if you do a Plone search, then you might come across those images and go, what's this? Plus, the editing experience, right? You've got to tell the people, go to this folder to change this thing which is on another page, right? That kind of sucks. Multiple tiles, multiple portlets. We've definitely done the multiple portlets thing. So each portlet represents a different pane in the carousel. We used things like portlet page in the past. We didn't use that for this. Now theme fragment tile, right? Like you actually create a tile using theme fragments. How many people know you can do that? How many people use theme fragments? It's super cool, right? So if you can create your own theme fragment tile, right? And you can create configuration, use it, and that's all sits in your theme. There's no need to deploy any Python whatsoever to have your own tile type. That means you can create a custom interface for a particular user. Unfortunately, it didn't really work for us in this case because at the moment you can't really use data grids. And if you want a carousel, right, you're going to have multiple rows. You've got unlimited rows, pretty much, right? Oh, unlimited panes. And relation choice doesn't work particularly well, which kind of sucks. So both of those things need to be fixed. So here's a simple trick that you can use for almost anything, right? Use an HTML table or a bulleted list, right? That's a data structure that's really simple to explain to a customer that you can apply some Diazo in front of it and do things with it. So we've done this in a whole bunch of places. So here's an example, right? Here's our carousel definition, which is it's just a rich text tile. I forget how I think we use a tile style. You've got to apply a tile style and say this is going to be a slider. Then Diazo knows and then goes and takes this. I'm not going to show you what the Diazo looks like because it's not pretty, but this works, right? You can put images over here, you can put HTML over here, you can put extra columns, etc. if you want to. So this was a really interesting one, right? So in customizing search is definitely getting a little more tricky because again, we're not deploying any Python packages here, right? So what they wanted to do here is they came to us and they said, we would have. This is an interesting one because they assumed that Plone would automatically work this way, and it doesn't, which kind of sucks, which is that you get default descriptions. You have to type in your descriptions and stuff. So they wanted to automate the descriptions to take the first paragraph. Okay, so how do we do that? Yeah, it's not a great idea. You get things like this, but it's also not a bad idea either. So what do we do? So we use Diazo first to redirect the search to go to faceted navigation. Nowadays we're using collective content filter instead of faceted navigation because again, faceted navigation comes with a whole bunch of JavaScript that just gets in the way of dependencies and stuff. Not that we use anything like that in the front end, but so then what we do is we add our own metadata thing called basic search summary. Not a lot of people know that you can actually just have metadata or indexes in the catalog and then just create a Python script with the same name, and through the magic of acquisition then suddenly you can have custom indexes with running custom Python code. We're going to get rid of acquisition, so we need to find a better way of doing this. This sucks, kind of doing it this way, but it's a nice get out of jail free card, right? So yeah, we then just use Plone's internal transformation chain to transform PDFs and things like that into HTML, and then just crop it. The actual code was a little bit more complicated because we filtered it out with different crap, but that's the basic idea, and it worked quite nicely. Except of course, so the great caveat with all of this stuff is that restricted Python is cool, except that no one actually tests for it anymore. So almost half the APIs, all the old APIs used to work, all the new APIs don't work because no one's put the right security stuff in there to make it available within restricted Python. Now we use listing view. I want to replace listing view with something else, but we don't have a good solution at the moment. I think maybe you can do it with theme fragments, but basically, like, you want a custom listing. You want to, and listing view works with things like faceted navigation and content filter, and basically can create views for either content or for listings, you know, like folded listings or collections and stuff. It'll create like first-class things that you can go to the display menu and say, I want a folder summary, right? You can create a folder summary with this. And Diazo. So this is actually, it's kind of interesting. For this, we didn't have to do, like, it allows you to write tile expressions to kind of calculate certain things within the listing. We didn't even have to do that because it just picks out the metadata columns and you can just pick them. So it was already done for us. So there's a bit of Diazo to make it look nice. So if we go back, you can see that, you know, we were pulling in the size. We were pulling in an icon. These things don't come with normal Plone search, unfortunately. Modified date does it come? I can't remember. But you can pull in lots of extra data, have a customized listing. Online help. This is something we did. I don't know why I didn't think about doing this before, right? We've got all these different kind of custom things that, you know, that are outside of the Plone manual. So what you can do is you can just write a little bit of HTML, stick it in your theme, and put this Diazo in there, and suddenly you've got online help that goes with, that is deployed with your theme. It's kind of nice. You can see my comment in there. I was like, it would have been super cool if I could just, the URL that I'm using, what is the actual URL there? But the URL to the actual bit of thing, it would be cool if I could just point it at the .rst file and get Plone to actually turn it into HTML on the fly. But you know. So you got to compile it before you deploy the theme. Feature tiles is one where we actually kind of use the theme fragment tile thing. Again, you can't use relation choice. Why can't I just pick an image, right, like I can with all this stuff? That's because relation choice doesn't work yet. It doesn't serialize or something. So we've got to fix that. So this is showing, right, so the way you do a theme fragment tile is you basically have to copy and paste the XML schema, but you can just go to the dexterity editor and create a bunch of configuration and copy it across. And put it, so it goes into a folder called fragments. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. This is, yeah, even more complicated stuff. We do some stuff, quite a few things to add customizations using content rules. They're pretty cool. So this is a case where we wanted people to have to fill out a form, but they only have to fill it out once. And then after that, they kind of have a cookie and everything. So we used a plugin that we made called Custom Login, which basically allows us to customize the login experience on a per content basis using content rules. So we then get it to redirect to form, then we use easy form and a script, and then we use the token role plugin, also really awesome, to create a token role that actually allows people to read the thing and does all the cookie for us. This is one we're doing at the moment, which is super interesting. We're going to change, we prototype this, we're going to change ambidexterity to be able to do things like auto-form hints and stuff don't work with ambidexterity. You don't have a way of sort of, you know, changing the widget or hiding and removing things dynamically and everything. We're going to add that to ambidexterity. We've tested it. It worked quite well. We're changing content rules, SC content rules, local roles. So what we want to do is this. Essentially, the plan here is to have a workflow where you can do things like pick who should be the next reviewer, right? So you can say, okay, so these are the people who should be in the review step in the DC workflow. And you can do that in the form. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to modify this to say, okay, so we're going to pick out the we're going to pick out a particular value from a field and make that the local role, and then when it goes, then we're going to mail them, and then we're going to do, yeah, we're going to modify collective cron as well to have content rules, to be able to do things on content based on dates within the content, which takes a bit to get your head around. So here I was going to demonstrate Plomino. How much time have I got? 5 minutes? 8? Okay. Right. Okay, so basically, all of this stuff is where you're dealing with content, right? Now there comes to a point where you're not sort of dealing with content anymore. You're not doing a workflow that relates to content. You're doing workflow or an application-y kind of thing where you want something more like a relational database, where you want more flexibility. You want an app, right? So where you might turn to, say, Django or Pyramid and have that running side by side or something like that. And that's what we kind of use Plomino and what we've built on top of it. Plomino Protoform. So I'll give you a quick demo of that. Right. So this is kind of a skin we put on forward for the product and stuff, but just imagine this, that you can just go add, service within Plone, and then you can start creating your app. So it's a placeful thing, right? So you can have it in a certain place on the site. It's not going in the control panel. It's like create it here, and then we can say, okay, which ones are going to demo? And it loads up the forms. Yep. Begin application. I mean, some of the nice things you can do with Plomino is you can do things like hide whens, which basically allow you to hide and show things at any particular dynamically based on what you select. I'm just trying to think if this demo has it. Maybe it doesn't. Oh yeah, there we go. So you can do all that kind of stuff. You can have sort of these different events. You can sort of have on-page open and all this kind of stuff, and write bits of Python to do all that sort of stuff without having to resort to JavaScript. And this kind of works for us because we have requirements that things have to work without JavaScript. So if we want to design this, and one of the things we built on top of Plomino is this big IDE that allows us to do things like we have a workflow editor, for example. So it opens with a workflow editor. So the workflow editor is kind of interesting in that what it does is it puts a layer of sort of documentation and flow on top of Plomino. It's not changing Plomino. It's not forcing it into. Plomino is quite flexible with regard to workflow. It's not like DC workflow. It's like things have to go through certain states. You're basically kind of linking things together with actions. So this kind of documents it and allows you to sort of say, okay, well, here's how it's supposed to work, and here's how things go together, and you can link actions and so on. This is the sort of, that's the code builder. So you can see that what it shows you, the code builder gets used in a bunch of places, but this shows you the code builder that's in submission. So it's not really working. But if we have a look at this, the application form itself, we've got a visual editor. We've got, everything's quite visual. We can just drag and drop these things around. We can edit field properties. So we've got, and where you add sort of behaviors and things, right, is in Plomino you would write code. Here we can do things like code builder, which is like, okay, we want a default value. That's a really brain dead example, but anyway. So we've added the default value, but then that goes and generates the necessary code. I think I didn't save it. Maybe have a look at this one. This is probably more interesting, right? So this will have like the hide when has, if the council, if there's other value here equals to pools, and we can pick, these other fields and stuff. Then we can do tests, different kinds of tests. then we're going to show it, otherwise we're going to hide it. And if we go have a look at the code for that, you can see it's generated all the code for us. So before in Plone, you had to write the code, which was simple code, but here you don't have to write the code. The really cool thing about this macro system is that you can build your own macros really easily, right? So if we go back to, what is that? There's a close IDE button somewhere that I've lost. Right, so if we go back to the start here, all those macros are actually just another Plone database with forms, so you define the configuration the same way using the visual designer, and you can actually like add as many macros as you want. So you can have validation macros, you can have condition macros, all the things that are in the palette on the left-hand side. You know, so we can have CSV download macro, right? We've done things for XML builders. We've connected up to e-commerce sites, and all of these things can kind of be written through the web. So it's a really extensible system. So if we go to designer, you can see you've got all those different things, and then we got all the things that appeared in the palette section here come out of our templates here, right? So the radio button up here is just this thing, and then we can customize that per site and say, this template is going to always have this particular bit of text on it, etc., etc. Okay, so that's that. I was going to show. I gave a similar kind of talk about, what was it, 5 years ago in Brazil, and I talked about like the idea that this kind of way of coding, like, okay, it's not best practice or anything, but it's super accessible, right? So the very first time I got involved with Zope, we were playing this game called Falling, which is now open source, and you can download it and print the cards. It's a real-time card game, which if you've never played a real-time card game, is kind of cool. Basically, the concept of the game is that everyone's jumped off a building, and the last one to hit the ground wins. So, and so the very first kind of web application I built at that point was like, this Zope transaction model kind of works the same way as it works for, like the way the cards get passed around, this real-time thing. So I built a real-time card game using Zope, and I don't know, about a year or two ago, I rebuilt it again in Rapido. I didn't get time to kind of get it working again, which is a shame because it's just been sitting there. It's having some problems with OS X updates and Python. So yeah, I wouldn't use Rapido anymore. It's kind of not maintained. I'd probably redo that in theme fragments. If you want something that's sort of like a little bit of an app that's just sitting as part of your page or something, use theme fragments for that. Here's another example. So we have this thing called collective trusted imports. Trusted imports, the idea is that everything that is external to Plone that you need whitelisted, go and add it here, right? So if you need functions, like we need things like encryption, and we use regular expressions and stuff. So then you can just do import regular RE, in your restricted Python. Go and add it into trusted imports, and then we get, we start to get things that have been sort of vetted and so on. But this is just showing, I had to do this thing the other day where I just want to do a quick CSV export of all the members, and these are all the different APIs that you can use in Plone that exist to get member email addresses. There's a lot of them, and almost none of them work in restricted Python. Plone.api doesn't work. So it kind of sucks. I got there in the end. I think it was mainly to do with CSRF protection, but yeah, that's it.
Any questions? Covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, that was a lot. Sorry.
I don't have a question, I have a statement. With the data grid, yes. The data grid field in the team editor or in Diazo it wasn't working. I found a solution for that. It's a bit of a hack using Python through the web. But
Okay.
yeah, I can pass on that code to you.
Nice, cool. I mean, the proper thing to do is we should find a way to encode it so that it works in. It does the encoding. Okay.
Yeah, it basically does the encoding through the web.
I should thank O'Shane and Altaru. Some of the stuff I showed you, they did for us. It's kind of collaborative on some of those themes. And I think O'Shane talked about it in his talk as well, right? Like one of the really cool things is that, so if we go actually have a look at this particular theme here, we had it initially, like one of the things you did with all this Diazo is you don't get to use Mosaic to move things around. They made it so that we could move things around. So if we go back to the site here, and you look at this front page, which is kind of some of the stuff I was showing, and click on edit. If you do move those tiles around, you know, you move these things around, then it moves all around, and they do, you know, like things like take Mosaic grid and turn it into, you know, Bootstrap 4 grid, because the theme that we were given was Bootstrap 4 grid, right? So again, that's stuff that Diazo makes easy.
I think it would be interesting to mention, like, with how many staff do you do all of this?
2. So we're hiring, by the way, in Sydney. So maybe Bangkok. Hopefully again London. So yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Dylan.
Thank you.
Thank you.